Welcome to the Elaborate Topics podcast, where we focus on lab-specific strategies for medical laboratory professionals. We're proud to be the healthcare detectives that work behind the scenes to get the results needed to influence medical decisions. Let's grow together and jump right into the lab.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Elaborate Topics podcast. I'm your host for today's show, Stephanie Whitehead. For those of you listening for the first time, I'm your podcasting lab leader and co-host for the show. The Elaborate Topics podcast is a weekly podcast where myself and my co-hosts, Tawana Wilson and Lona Small, bring you topics related to laboratory and leadership that help you excel inside and outside the laboratory. And for today's show, we have some really great information and a special guest, so I'm really excited. Be sure to like this episode and share it with all of your laboratory friends on social media. Tag us and comment. We want to hear from all of you. So, like I said, we have a very special guest for today's show. I'm really excited. Miss Ann Tate is with us. Welcome to the show, Ann.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. I'm really excited to be here today.
I'm really excited to have you. Why don't you take a moment and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your laboratory journey?
All right. So, obviously, I am a medical technologist from Colorado. I went to the University of Colorado. And then I worked at National Jewish Hospital in Denver, and I started out in the chemistry laboratory and then took on some IT with a new LIS called SunQuest. Isn't that funny? And then I eventually became the laboratory manager, and National Jewish is a specialty laboratory for immunology and complement studies and mycobacterium or TB. So it had a range of areas that I was over, and it was like a great experience. Then my husband was transferred to Omaha, and I had a chance to work for a startup automation IT company, and so I did, and it was probably one of the best experiences and one of the hardest experiences ever, coming from a really unautomated laboratory to working in automation, total lab automation. I got to travel all over the world and work with laboratories in Europe and in Israel, so that was a excellent experience to kind of with my background in IT and automation. And then unfortunately that startup went the company went out of business, but then I was able to work with Sysmex as a IT product manager and group manager, where I helped develop several products, including Sysmex WAM and middleware for hematology, automation, and standalone instruments. And that was, again, one of the most experiences that I would never have dreamed that I'd be involved in. And I was able to bring up middleware for over 1,500 laboratories. And then I decided to go out on my own, which was scary during a pandemic last year, to start with my partner my own consulting company for automation and auto verification. And one of the first things that happened right out of the gate was that we were picked up by the Dark Intelligence Group to help do their podcast, their COVID-19 podcast. And we started out just doing the research for it, getting some of the speakers, and then we took it over and produced over 100, and I produced and moderated over 111 podcasts. So things that I never thought I would do, or we have opportunity for. So that's my background.
So you've had such an amazing laboratory journey, from being in the industry to like now being an entrepreneur. And I've said this on many different shows about my fellow laboratorian. I have yet to find a laboratorian who went into college just saying, I want to be a medical laboratory scientist. Most people I know fell into the profession in some odd way. They went on one track and they got diverted to laboratory science, or they passed by a table at a career fair and, stopped at the laboratory science table and then changed their major. So why don't you tell us and the listeners, why did you choose the laboratory industry as your profession?
Well, I probably am an exception to the rule because I was always in high school, of course, interested in science. And my mom decided to take me one time when I was a junior in high school to the hospital laboratory. She thought I'd be really interested in it. So it was really from when I was in high school that I was interested in being a medical technologist. And you know what? I went right into college, and that was my degree right from the beginning. I never changed from the beginning to end. So I'm probably an exception to the rule. Medical technology and the science was, really what I wanted to do. So it kind of was a straight line right to medical technology. So
I stand corrected. I have met guys. She is a unicorn. She is a unicorn.
I know. And you have to thank my mom for doing that. She, that was her mission to get, she thought I'd really be interested into it. So
thanks, Mom.
I have to thank her for that.
Shout out to Mom.
Exactly.
Well, of all of those avenues, all of those roads, all those positions that you talked about, what was your favorite position in your career journey?
Well, I have to say, I have a special place for being a medical technologist and actually being in the laboratory and, being involved, from the groundwork, especially with IT. I helped implement the LIS system at National Jewish Hospital and really kind of set up the groundwork for their outreach and outpatient programs. We had marketing programs back in the late 1990s, and we had outreach in IT, and that was probably my most favorite because I could understand how the lab worked in an organization, obviously with IT and informatics, but also how it flowed out to customers, and we had customers, all over the U.S. and over the world, where you were kind of the reference lab to the reference labs, and that gave me the background and the foundation then to go on to other IT sort of jobs and understand how really important informatics is in the laboratory profession, but also, as it moves up in the organization, to the hospital or other entities, how important it is. And so I have a really special place for National Jewish in Denver, that it gave me the background and the opportunity to. I made some spectacular failures in IT there, but I learned so much, and it was the best place for me to get a background that helped me propel to other organizations and other IT types of forums that I could succeed at. So it was a great place for me.
That's so good when we can name those points in our career that we can look at. In the moment, we probably looked at like this was a failure, or I'm making a lot of mistakes, but in hindsight, it really propelled us into something really awesome that we enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. I had one of the first outreach pieces of software that we did with doctor offices, and it was really hard. It was, in the late 1990s, and we got like 4 or 5 customers up, and then we had all kinds of problems. We worked through them, but it was, like a journey that, you could not replicate without living, like living the movie, going through it to find out what the problems are. And those kind of learnings have helped me go forward into my other IT-based jobs that, I have that experience in what, you need to do to overcome those kind of challenges.
Exactly. Now, you mentioned the Dark Intelligence Group, and many of our listeners are familiar with that group as the clinical source for essential news related to our industry. They're well known for the Dark Report Journal and the Executive War College National Meetings. But I want to dive right into talking about you as a fellow podcaster, about your podcast and how you became connected with the Dark Intelligence Group.
Well, just like every medical technology, every laboratory person should network all the time. And like you mentioned, I went to the War College. I went to their quality confab and networked with them and got to know Robert Michelle and got to know the group. Working at Sysmex, we also worked with them in joint marketing and joint promotions and programs like that. So I got to know Robert and his group over the years and networked with his associates and colleagues. So when we started our company, our consulting firm, Talking Laboratories, he was one of the first people that responded to us. So like, what are you doing? I want to know what interesting things you're trying to get into, good trouble. And so, we just started talking, and he said, I want to start, this is last year, this last year in the April time frame. And he said, I want to start a podcast, and I need a group of people that are just going to be go-getters and help me with this. And so that's how it really started with my partner, Debbie Smith, and I, that we just talked with them and we came up with ideas and brainstormed on how to bring up this podcast. And like I said, initially we were just doing the research in the background for it. Then one day in June he said, I think I want you guys to produce it and moderate it, so take it over. And we did. We took the leap of faith and did it. So it's been an exciting run, I have to say. And now we're going to do their second podcast for precision medicine. It actually starts August 17th. And so we're trying to bring a whole idea and format of precision medicine, which is what they feel is the next big thing in laboratory, in the laboratory industry. And we're going to be producing a weekly podcast for the Dark Report for precision medicine.
That is amazing. It's amazing, the transformation. And earlier you mentioned you guys have reached 100+ episodes. So talk about the reach of your podcast, like from where it started to where it is now, maybe a couple of things that you've learned about yourself going through the journey of podcasting. I know for myself, in the beginning I was so nervous to talk to people, to to elaborate, to have conversations. But what I've learned is that the biggest compliment that myself and my co-hosts get about the Elaborate Topics podcast is how practical it is. That we really are just three laboratory women, three laboratory ladies who talk about practical tips, working day in and day out in the laboratory. And so what I've learned is that even the episodes that I think are not perfect and, maybe I stumbled over my words or the interview didn't flow the way I thought, that people still find value in it, and that there needs to be that connection of all of us in our profession so we can hear each other's voice and kind of lean on each other as we go through things. So back to the question. Sorry, I'm rambling. Talk about, your podcast, the reach, where it's transformed from since you started.
Well, the reach of the Dark Intelligence Group just normally or organically has a group, a community of laboratory technologists, managers, directors, even CEOs and above that use this information to kind of get to know where where the industry is going, with reimbursement, with regulatory and innovations. Those are really what they bring to the industry because it's all focused on the laboratory. And so the reach of it, though, and those are the people that we are reaching in our podcast, was that audience. But interestingly enough, there are a lot of new entrants into the laboratory industry that are really non-traditional, people that were researchers, companies that were startup and did other IT innovations, maybe in other healthcare industries, people that brought companies that brought together the healthcare with the IT, and those people then were on our podcast, and they were, supporting the healthcare industry using IT products for COVID-19 testing. They would be the technology behind the home testing or behind the information, getting it from the testing center to another area or to the government. There's a lot of companies that maybe non-traditional that needed the information in a quick way, in a concise way, and that's what the podcast was. Only 30 minutes. We focused on learning objectives, meaning that we provided actionable information, lessons learned to the audience so that they could get quick hits of information in a fast-paced changing of COVID-19. So we really kind of expanded the audience beyond the laboratory and those that support the laboratory, especially for IT, for recruitment of people, and for matching up laboratories with providers. So I think we were most proud of that, of bringing different groups, diverse groups together to support the laboratory during COVID-19.
And that's what we need, right? I mean, I think when we first started as well, we were able to easily get, a niche within our own community. But the real success is to have people outside of our laboratory community recognize what we're doing and have an interest in the laboratory profession. So where do you see these platforms going in the future? You mentioned you have a second, a podcast coming forward through Precision Medicine. Where do you see it going in the future? Where do you hope to see it grow to?
Well, the Dark Intelligence Group sees precision medicine is one of the programs from the laboratory that will grow and expand, meaning laboratory data is going to become so important for personalized medicine, meaning that the testing and that is put into informatics and is added to what the patient's symptoms are and new innovations, and you can design new treatments that are personalized, and partly based on a person's genetics, so they get the treatment that is specific for them and their condition. And so that brings together many different groups. It brings together, of course, laboratorians that are performing the testing and laboratorians that are involved in developing new testing, genetic sequencing, and testing around that and methodologies. It brings researchers into the fold. It brings in hospital administrators and even hospital CEOs and CFOs that want to bring up these precision medicine programs and link them to other national programs and other national initiatives. So it's bringing all of these groups together to discuss what is the innovations that are coming up, and the challenges to getting a precision medicine program established in an organization, what it takes, what the reimbursement is, what the regulatory issues are, and what there could be impacts to patients and ethics, that type of thing. So this podcast will encompass all of those different issues, innovations, challenges, and opportunities. It's once a week for 30 minutes, and we have national industry speakers that are coming on board to help us navigate this topic. So I'm really excited about it.
It sounds super exciting.
Yeah, and one of the things that, I don't have perfect knowledge around this, but that's the whole exciting part of this, is to learn from all these industry leaders and then be able to try to understand and get out the important things that they want to portray in a podcast like you do, Stephanie, and get that out to the industry. So I'm super excited about it.
So for me, it almost seems like although it was a very difficult time for our community and our country and our healthcare field, so many things have been born from, the COVID times, the pandemic, so many great ideas, so many great collaborations. It hardly seems like now you can have a conversation without incorporating the impact of COVID on, whatever you're talking about. So I'm interested to know, since you have been podcasting, what are some of the most interesting discussions or maybe hot topics that you've been able to review on your podcast?
Well, the hot topics in the beginning, really, the COVID-19 went through some peaks and valleys of hot topics, right? So the first part of COVID, the phase one, I call it, was all about supply chain, right? And that's what we were trying to bring to them, useful and tips and things that other laboratories were using to resolve their supply chain. So that was a really hot topic in the beginning. And then how are laboratories going to manage the volume and having multiple platforms and how to get them, validated and verified and bring them up so that, and then once they got through all of that, then, it then became the reimbursement. How are they going to get reimbursed? And what was the right way to do that with CPT codes and the billing aspects? So then we brought in revenue cycle management speakers to help them through that. And then once the testing, really got on board and got, laboratories were used to the volume and they've got worked out their workflow and productivity, began how can they expand their programs. And then one of the most exciting ones that I thought was, and like you had said, you thought it might be one of the most boring ones, but it became one of the most popular ones, is how do you know the difference between surveillance and screening for COVID-19? Because the school programs, as we moved into that, and school testing and college testing and business testing became a real issue, we brought in speakers to address a screening versus surveillance testing and like pooled testing. Who ever really knew a lot about pooled testing? And we brought experts into that. And then towards the end of the, our journey through COVID-19 and the trajectory, it came to variant testing. So we brought in experts on variant testing and gene testing and how to manage that now with patients' immunity, titrating, and then how to go forward. How is the industry going to use the informatics from this gene testing to help inform the creation of the vaccination? So through the different phases of COVID-19, we brought in those experts to address that as we moved along, really the continuum. So lots of really big topics along along our COVID-19 journey.
Right? And for me, over this past year, I've had the awesome opportunity, and for our listeners, you can go back and look at some of these episodes to talk to so many people like yourself who have been using different platforms like podcasting, like social media, even Twitter, to just find ways for us to connect as laboratory professionals and to have these discussions to help each other through, these different unchanging times and to get advice from each other, like I said, collaborate and lean on each other. And it's different territory, but I think it is extremely welcome because, how else are we going to get through pandemics like this unless we can have access to our professionals in Canada and our professionals across the United States and just understand what are the new regulations, like you said, billing, how are you handling billing, how are you handling increasing your operations, what does your productivity look like, and we can really start to ask the questions. It only makes the industry better and it only makes the testing better for our clinicians and our patients ultimately. But I wanted to ask you, as a person who connects with so many different people in our industry, in your opinion, how has the power of social media, podcasting, using these digital platforms helped to evolve and enhance the way that laboratory professionals have a voice? And we can also advocate for our profession, right? Like we mentioned before, there are people who are outside of our profession now who have a window in to helping understand what we're going through when we're doing things like bringing up COVID testing.
Well, I think that the social media aspects and the podcasting has has had a huge impact on the laboratory and even the management of the laboratory. And that's one of the things why we named our company Talking Laboratories, because we wanted to bring people together and get the conversations. Ours was specific on productivity in the laboratory and automation and auto verification. But the main thing was that social media then gives different groups like yours and mine, a platform to bring these ideas, these discussions, how we feel about our profession and what we have expertise in to the forefront. It gives us a way and a voice to bring that to everybody. It's really the equalizer, I think, among our profession, and also I think that it engages the younger people in our profession that are used to using social media platforms, using all of them, and better than we do. So I think this is like a very exciting time in laboratory medicine, even though the COVID-19 put a lot of stress on our industry, I also think it gave a real big picture about how important the laboratory is in the healthcare continuum, and who's doing your testing, and why these people are so dedicated and are such special people to help be the first responders, right, during a pandemic, but for everything, and for cancer development and treatments and precision medicine, the laboratory is where it really starts. And social media gives us a way, a mechanism, a methodology to get that information out. So I feel like it is a great forum for our industry right now.
And we've talked about this before as well on our podcast, but to me and to some of my colleagues, there's just that notion that there isn't the amount of buy-in from laboratory professionals to remain connected, to value networking, and to really push the agenda of collaboration like there may be in some other fields like physicians or nursing, where they have really strong laboratory, or not laboratory, but industry professions that govern them. And so, in your opinion, why is it important for laboratory professionals to stay connected, to network, to share our thoughts and ideas, to join organizations like ASCP or AABB, and to really, stay connected with our community?
Well, first of all, I think just being connected gives you ideas. It sparks passion. Just on its own, and networking with people, you can learn from them, see it through their eyes, and that's the best way to help your career, is to network with all kinds of people across all of the different types of laboratory professionals out there, either in different disciplines or vendors or just your old bosses. You just never know what will come up. I would have never told you a year ago or 5 years ago that I would be helping moderate and co-produce a podcast, and never even crossed my mind. And just keeping those relationships, keeping those networking, and keeping up on the industry as a whole, helps you with your career, but also as a well-rounded person within your organization. So I advocate to keep learning, keep networking, just learn everything you can within and outside the profession, because you'll have a better career, and I think you'll be a lot happier. And you just never know the opportunities that will come. It's just amazing, if you keep the connections up, what will happen.
I cannot agree more. And, sometimes as laboratory people, we tend to be maybe more introverted or keep to ourselves. It was always so difficult for me when I would go to conferences and you sit at those dinner tables with the white cloths and the bread.
I know.
And you're
and nobody talks.
Nobody says anything, and you're all, surrounded around people you're not familiar with. And it is very difficult to make small talk, but I've actually challenged myself over the past few years to take not take different courses, but actually just, invest in that area because I felt like it was a weakness of mine. So I listened to different podcasts and actually watched YouTubes on, how to start small conversations.
How to do a podcast. I know it.
And, it really has stretched my personal skills. I'm able to be a better conversationalist, which, like you said, helps in your career. There are some soft skills that, we have the technical skills. We know how to run tests and validate tests and do procedures and pass CAP inspections, but there are some soft skills that you also need to invest in for you to be successful in your career. So what are some ways that, going into podcasting, being an entrepreneur has stretched your personal skills? What things that you've seen, you've now strengthened in your skills?
Well, one of the things that I think just like you, I had to get over contacting these luminaries in the industry, doctors and physicians and researchers and lawyers, and just being able to, talk to them, try to focus in what I need for them to present on the podcast, be a good listener, understanding what their angle is for the podcast, and then be able to ask pertinent questions. These are things that I really had to learn on the fly. You have some innate skills in that area, but you really had to learn it pretty quickly. And so I feel like I became a better listener and being able to pinpoint and hone in on the key messages. Because our podcast is only 30 minutes, so we really have to move along and bring up the highlights and frame the narrative. So I've learned to do that. But I think the other thing, seeing yourself, because ours is a visual podcast, and then just like you said, when you mess up, you just have to learn to go on and take it in and not, get upset during the podcast. You have to be able to manage any technical issues you have and still make it go. And then just listening to your own voice has been an adjustment. And so those kind of skills, like you say, soft skills, I've gotten better at. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm getting more used to it and more comfortable in the speaking and seeing myself on camera in that arena.
I will say ditto to everything you said, especially the part about hearing yourself. I think on our first couple of episodes, I called my husband and I was like, that's what I sound like? You didn't even tell me that.
I know it.
But then also,
absolutely,
like, I've done a couple of, Zoom interviews and so forth, or things on television or digitally. And like you said, seeing yourself when you mess up, continuing to move forward. My partners and I, my co-host and I, did a conference session at a recent, I say fairly recent, it was this year, ASCLS conference, and we had the worst audio and technical issues. Oh my God.
Exactly.
It was the first time I was using that platform also actually to present, and I came home and I was like, that was probably the worst presentation I've ever done in my life, and I just felt so down. And I was, sometimes as laboratorians also, and I'm sure the listeners can relate, we're perfectionists also, right?
Exactly.
We have something that we have in our mind and we think they're going to go a certain way, and when it doesn't, it's just like, oh my gosh. And, I was so down on myself and just happened to glance at my phone, and I had so many notifications from all my different social media outlets of people tagging me. People had screenshotted, the session. People were sharing it, saying, this is the most awesome session we've had all day. Please come back next year. And I was
you never know, do you?
You just never know. And so one thing I would say to the listeners, if you're thinking about starting something, just start. It won't be perfect in the beginning. You'll learn some things on the fly. Just do it. There's somebody out there who needs to hear your message, even if you feel like it's not perfect. Just they want to hear it the way it is, and you'll help somebody. Even if it's not perfect in your mind, you'll be helping somebody. So for you, Miss Ann, you've done so much. You have so many awesome accomplishments. I've really enjoyed talking to you. What's next for you in your career?
Well, I really, because being involved really in an intimate level with all types of people around the industry, avocation is next to my career, so I really do want to be involved on a national level, promoting the laboratory and the issues that impact the laboratory. And so I joined the ASCLS Political Action Committee. And so I hope to get more involved on a legislative, level and try to advocate between the laboratory profession, and the federal government and really our clinical laboratory sciences. I'm really interested in how laboratory medicine impacts legislative decisions. And so I want to be involved in that level. So it's time in my career to move it up to that point and really try to be a voice for our profession on a national forum in the legislative type of format. So that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm trying to move towards, still doing the podcasting and still doing consulting, laboratory productivity, but adding that to my list of things that I really want to do.
Well, best of luck in that. We can never have enough advocates. And we always love to say on this podcast, you get into the profession which you get out of the profession which you put in.
Exactly.
And so, we have to be our own voices and put in the work so we can get out the results.
Exactly.
A lot of times on my interviews, I love to ask the guests fun fact questions, and so I have one for you. So, Ms. Tate, if there were a book written about you, what would the title be, and what would be written on the back of the book summary?
Well, that is a great question, by the way. So I think I would title my book Serendipity, because it seems like every milestone in my career has sort of been born out of serendipitous or unexpected turns in my career that I could never anticipated, that I never really prepared for. So I took a leap of faith of leaving my much loved hospital position to go to a startup. And when I mean startup, I mean, a small company that had a vision to do total lab automation. And I had no background in it at all, and then I just absolutely loved it. And that didn't, and that company failed, but it was the greatest learning experience I ever had. And then serendipitous, again, Sysmex came and said, I know that, your company failed, but we want to bring you on for IT. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it. I'll take this on and do middleware. And then after I did that, just taking the leap of faith of starting my own company, my own consulting company, and then, doing a podcast. Who would ever think that would happen? So I think the summary is that for every big decision, I had to make an intentional decision to push myself in these serendipitous or unexpected situation and try to extend my skill set and just do it and not try to think too much, about what could go wrong or how I could fail. I always saw it as what could I learn from it and how could I be successful in it. So these moments of fork in the roads may seem random or somehow connected, but I tried to leverage them for opportunities. So serendipitous is what
we're going to hashtag this conversation serendipity and just do it. Just leap out there. Just
exactly.
Do it. I have so enjoyed this conversation. You have been so interesting to talk to and to learn from. And as we wrap up our talk, I love to ask my guests also, what advice can you leave for our laboratory listeners that they can use in their own professional lives? Like I said in the intro, our podcast is all about helping our listeners have tools to excel inside and outside of the laboratory. So I'm curious, what are 2 or 3 things, maybe books you read or apps you use or podcasts you listen to yourself that you can leave with our listeners to help them achieve their goals?
Well, kind of the through line of this conversation is networking. You have to, and it's like location, network. You have to do that. You have to make it part of your day, part of your persona, to be always, trying to learn new things, network with people, even over LinkedIn. I'm a big LinkedIn person, as you know, Stephanie, and I link to people that I think are most interesting, things that I would never think about, things that are probably outside of the lab industry, but then give me ideas and inspiration, and I think it's about inspiration as well. And then just do anything you can that's out of your comfort zone. If there's an opportunity in your hospital to do a cross-functional committee that's outside of the laboratory, take the opportunity. Don't think about it. Don't think that you're going to fail. You will succeed. So, or be involved in professional organizations, even the things that are not in the laboratory are part of it. Just be involved in professional organizations to grow your network, to grow your field of experience. And then education. So education has been a huge part of my growth. I have an MBA, and then recently in my older age, I got a master's in healthcare informatics, and it has been, I've met people I never would have met. I met doctors that were going back to school. I met people in medical records that find that informatics is important for them and for the healthcare industry. So anything you can do to extend your skills, it could be simple, just a little learning program, or you could go as far as getting some a big a degree. Is never a bad time to do that, no matter where you are in your age or in your profession. You should always seize education and never stop learning, right, and improving your skill set. So those are my recommendations and what's helped me.
Those are awesome recommendations. And also, outside of this episode of the Elaborate Topics podcast, how can our listeners learn more about you, connect with you, reach out to you, maybe get mentorship from you? How can people just stay connected?
Well, you can go to talkinglabs.net. That is our website, and you can connect with me there, or at talkinglabs@talkinglabs.net. That's my email. And you can follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter under Talking Labs. We also have a great blog series that we write about IT and the intersection of lab productivity and innovations. We interview also industry leaders about innovation. We have blogs about IT stewardship and audit verification, so you can get to know us through that. And also you can join our new podcast at the Dark Intelligence Group on Precision Medicine that starts August 17th. And so just go to precisionmedicineinstitute.com and subscribe for our live podcast. So we hope that you join us anywhere you can. Again, social media, I think, is the great equalizer for the laboratory, and we hope you take advantage of it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Elaborate Topics podcast today, Ms. Ann.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. It's been a pleasure, and kudos for you guys for doing this and supporting the laboratory industry and all that you do. And I congratulate you guys on a successful year as well.
I appreciate that. And thank you to our listening audience for tuning into the show with our special guest, Ms. Ann Tate, who's been sharing so many gems and recommendations for how to excel in your career. Be sure to check out her podcast, her live podcast on precisionmedicineinstitute.com. Check out, Talking Laboratories on Facebook, Twitter, as she said. Share with your laboratory professionals so you can get involved in the conversations that they are talking about. If you like what you heard today and you want to listen to our previous shows, you can subscribe to the Elaborate Topics podcast at directimpactbroadcasting.com. Remember to email us at the elaboratetopics@directimpactbroadcasting.com to learn more about this topic or to be a guest on our show. We'd love to hear from you. You can always follow me at Stephanie Whitehead on all of my social medias, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. Please tune in next week to hear another amazing episode of the Elaborate Topics podcast. And until then, have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Elaborate Topics, where your hosts discussed relevant strategies for laboratory professionals. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and listen to us on directimpactbroadcasting.com. Stay tuned for another episode with information you can use to excel in your laboratory career.